Good morning, and thanks everybody for coming out. So let's see. There we go. So about 30 years ago, the pharmaceutical industry started to hit a wall. Until then, it was all focused on small molecules, and all of pharmaceutical R&D happened in-house in some of the major pharmaceutical companies. Turns out, small molecules are really good at doing what they're supposed to do, that is, binding to that target receptor and having a known and reliable effect when they do so. The bad news is small molecules are kind of uncommon in biological systems, and so they can also tend to do things that they're not intended to do, right? And so in human health, in the pharmaceutical industry, this means bad side effects, right? And in the pharmaceutical industry, this led to a lot of blockbusters needing to be pulled from the market. It led to a lot of companies being forced into major M&A to try to bolster their pipelines, and it led to really a revolution in the whole pharmaceutical industry, which was the rise of biopharma, the rise of the biotech industry, the rise of the biotech VC industry to support that. We would argue at Vestaron, that the AgChems industry is now hitting that same wall that pharmaceuticals hit about 30 years ago. So much like pharmaceuticals, until today, AgChems has been all based on small molecules, all in-house development inside the major companies. And just like in pharmaceuticals, these small molecules have unintended side effects. In agriculture, though, instead of it being human health side effects, although sometimes it is that, it tends to be more things like environmental damage, like harm to honeybees, as an example. And so we believe that the same revolution that transformed the entire structure of the pharmaceutical industry is now coming to AgChems. And we believe that we are at the forefront of that revolution, and that is why we say we are dedicated to improving the safety, efficacy, and sustainability of crop protection through migration from chemical pesticides to biologic peptides. So as mentioned, chemical pesticides, good news is they're really good at doing what they're supposed to do. Bad news is they also do other things. They cause environmental damage, they do harm to beneficial insects, they can create safety issues for labor, and sometimes human health issues as well. In addition, much like antibiotics in the pharmaceutical industry, in the world of pesticides, you need constant innovation because all the things you're trying to kill with your pesticides eventually develop resistance to those pesticides. So it's not good enough to have a great insecticide. You need a constant stream of new, hopefully safe and environmentally friendly insecticides. And because it's become so much more difficult to bring new AgChems to market because of the environmental issues and the resulting increase in regulatory burden, the industry is really suffering from not just a lack of safe and environmentally friendly molecules, but a lack of effective molecules in general. So we believe that peptides, much like it was proteins, biologics, were the answer in pharmaceuticals, we believe peptides are the answer in AgChems. So they are safe for humans and mammals, for birds and fish, for beneficial insects, and as a result of that safety, there is a 0-day pre-harvest interval. So if you are in the business of wanting to grow your hothouse tomatoes today and put them on the shelf at Whole Foods tomorrow, you can do that with these peptides. You don't have to have a harvest interval to allow the residuals to degrade. Peptides are sustainable. We produce them in a yeast-based fermentation, so very much renewable. They are environmentally friendly. They degrade to amino acids and water in the environment, so no issues with metabolites or residuals. And because, much like the small molecules, they bind to known targets and do so in reliable ways and have a reliable effect when they do so, you can actually get the same level of efficacy that you get with small molecules. And sometimes you can actually get even greater specificity because you have a larger binding site. And with that larger binding site, we think it will actually be more difficult for pests to develop resistance to these peptides than it was for them to develop resistance to small molecules, because if you think about a larger binding site, it just makes it less likely that a single point mutation is going to disrupt that binding and therefore enable the pest to become resistant. So before Vestaron, in the world of AgChems, there were really two distinct classes of a solution. On the one hand, you had the synthetics. And again, the good news about the synthetics is they worked. They did what they were supposed to do. The bad news is, especially as the safety and environmental issues have mounted and the regulatory burden as a result has also mounted, they became very costly and time-consuming to develop, right? And they do have these safety and environmental issues. On the other hand, you had these microbial solutions where people would go and dig up some dirt and culture up the microbes and go, hey, that dirt was working really well for those plants, so that group of microbes must be good for plants, and then that was also a crop growth or crop protection solution. The problem is you were dealing with some sort of soup, and you really didn't know why it worked or how it worked, and because it was biologic in nature, it didn't always work, right? It depended on the environment, it depended on the crop, etc. And so the good news is, these were safe and environmentally friendly and much less cost and time to develop, but the bad news was they weren't super reliable, and as a result, people developed a level of skepticism about them. We believe that peptides are kind of the Goldilocks, if you will, of AgChems, right? So we have that level of efficacy, that reliable, known target interaction that you get with the small molecules, but we bring with it the safety and environmental friendliness, and as a result, lower cost and lower amount of time to develop features of biologic molecules. So if this is so obvious and so great, why are we the first to do it? That is because until Vestaron, there were really three fundamental issues that needed to be overcome. The first was, how do you produce these things at scale and at reasonable cost? Nobody had figured that out. The second was, how do you make them bioavailable? So these are bigger molecules. So in the field, what needs to happen is for the insect to eat this molecule, right? For it to pass through the digestive tract out into the equivalent of the blood, right, the hemolymph, and to get to that target receptor to kill the insect. Well, with a small molecule, that just all happens automatically. With a larger peptide, it doesn't. So you have to figure out how to do that, right? And then finally, nobody knew before Vestaron, nobody had ever tried to take an isolated biologic molecule down the regulatory path that was previously reserved solely for microbial solutions. And so nobody knew, was the EPA going to treat us like a biologic, like a microbial, or were they going to treat us like a small molecule? And so with the launch of our first peptide-based crop protection product, Vestaron has overcome all three of these issues. So we now have a proprietary production platform. As I mentioned, it is a yeast-based fermentation. It is world-class, and we are able to produce these peptides at a cost that allows us to sell them at price parity with the leading synthetics in the market. We also figured out how to make them bioavailable. So it turns out there is an existing biologic insecticide called BT, which has never been particularly widely used in field agriculture because it's not very UV stable. It doesn't work very well as a field solution. But all we need is just a tiny bit of BT activity, because what BT does, the way it acts, is it tears little holes in the gut. And so that's perfect for our peptide. BT tears the little holes, our peptide goes through, gets out to the target receptor, kills the insect. And finally, regulatory. So we persuaded the EPA that we should be treated like a microbial, right? A biologic solution, because we have this wonderful safety and environmental profile, this wonderful degradation profile, et cetera. And so Vestaron was the first, and to date is the only company to have taken an isolated biologic molecule down what used to be the microbials path at the EPA. The EPA realizes, though, that more of this is coming, so they've created a new emerging technologies division within that branch. They've told us already that that will be the path for not just our first, but all of our future molecules, and other companies working on similarly innovative technologies will also be able to take advantage of that path. So this is our first family of products. They are based on the Spear peptide. So what's really exciting here, so there is this group of, sort of effectively kind of gods in the world of insecticidal chemistry called the IRAC Committee, the Insect Resistance Action Committee, right? Don't you just want to be on that? And so these guys decide if your solution works the same way, right, targets the same receptor at the same site as some existing chemistries, or works in a novel way, right? And so what I learned getting into crop protection is it turns out in the whole history of insecticides, right, so this industry's been around for a while, there are only 32 acknowledged modes of action, and we are number 32 all by ourselves. So that means there's only 32 good ways to kill a bug. And then it gets even crazier than that, because of those 32, only 14 are nerve and muscular modes of action, and it turns out by far those are the most effective ways to kill a bug. Then it turns out that those 14 actually only target 8 different receptors in an insect, and 6 of those 8 receptors are far and away the most important. So 80% of the global $18 billion insecticide market is based on 6 receptors in an insect. Spear targets the single most important, the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, which all by itself is responsible for 30% of that global market. But the exciting thing about Vestaron is we also have in our pipeline additional peptides targeting all the rest of those 6 receptors. And so we have the ability to basically reset the resistance clock, if you will, for all of the most important receptors in insecticidal chemistry, and to do so with safe and environmentally friendly molecules. We have turned our Spear peptide into 2 products as of today. The first one is called Spear T. This is aimed at greenhouses, and in greenhouses it kills all 4 major greenhouse pests, so that's thrips, whiteflies, aphids, and mites. And then we have in the field, our first product is called Spear Lep, and so this targets lepidopteran pests, so caterpillars, in high-value crops like fruits and vegetables. We will continue to bring out other field products, also based on the Spear peptide, targeting other classes of insect as well. So this is all about Spear. So like I said, it is sustainable, right? It's renewable. It's unlike a lot of microbial solutions. The other great thing about Spear is it is drop-in to your existing farming practices. So it is water soluble. It is stable. It can go right into your tank mix because it tolerates a wide range of pH. It's going to be effective in the field for 7 to 10 days, unlike, as I mentioned, some of the earlier biologics that are not UV stable or degrade very quickly. There is no phytotox. There are no regulated residues, so great for export crops, and 0-day pre-harvest interval, right? So you can go right to the grocery store shelf. And also for worker safety, a 4-hour re-entry interval, which is the shortest possible time window you can be given by the EPA. So, Vestaron, what are we working on? So today, we are focused on this particular class of cysteine-rich peptides that have this insecticidal activity. And as I mentioned, we believe we have the ability to, with those, redrug all of the major synthetic insecticide target receptors with nice, safe, environmentally friendly molecules. And then in the future, we think we can take this same technology platform and really expand across other areas of crop protection. So there are very similar peptides that have fungicidal activity as an example, and we've brought our first fungicidal peptides into our early stage pipeline as well. There are also applications beyond agriculture of insecticidal peptides, so things like the consumer business, right? So for your backyard garden, things like animal health, so controlling pests in livestock situations, and also potentially public health, right? So killing mosquitoes, things like that. So it is also the case that our production platform can not only produce peptides that are going to be relevant as pesticides, but can also produce single-domain antibodies, as an example, for the pharmaceutical industry. So we believe we have the ability to expand our technology platform even beyond the world of ag tech. And then finally, so for those crops that are GM crops, right, so most of the major row crops in the US, their major method of insect control is the Bt trait as a GM trait. But the problem is there are lots of pests that are starting to develop resistance to that Bt trait. And so the majors have been stacking multiple Bt genes to try to deal with that. It turns out that because of kind of the cooperative nature of Bt and our peptide, and because we only need a tiny bit of Bt activity in order to do what we need it to do, we have shown that you can even take Bt-resistant insects, and if you feed them the combination of Bt and Spear, you can get full control of those insects. So those are all future directions for the company. And so this is what we look like today. We're about 35 people. We're about 12 years old. I came on as the new CEO really to push us into the commercial world a little over a year ago. We have just located our headquarters in RTP, in the Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina. And then we have our historical research site in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And for those of you who are familiar with ag tech, you'll note that that's kind of a who's who of the kind of ag tech venture capital world. And then I will also just point out Novo Holdings, for anybody not familiar with them. They are the parent company of both Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical company, and Novozymes, the industrial enzyme company. What they have done over time is sort of take their earnings from being the parent of both of those and turned it into a $55 billion life science investment portfolio. And what's really exciting for us about having them in as investors is that while they had been thinking about it and wanting to do it for a while, we were their first foray into ag tech. So we consider that a pretty nice badge of honor because they are quite sophisticated life science investors known as very much leaders in the industry. So my time is up. So thank you all for listening and hope you have a great rest of your conference.